Okay everybody, so let's go ahead and start here. Go to your browser that you use day in, day out, and go to www.blender.org. Now, you'll be able to download 2.8 straight away from 2.8 beta is out. Very exciting. I can't wait to get into it. However, there are a few things to work through because when you go ahead and download Blender 2.8, you're presented with this screen. If you're downloading for another operating system, you can switch between them, but the installation process is slightly different. Now, I'm going to require 2.8 Windows 64. Occasionally, the Blender website might indeed change. If that does happen, then go to the Download tab at the very top, and there's an option to try Blender 2.8 beta. If you click on that, we get to this screen as well up here. Now that's going to take a few minutes to download, and what I tend to do is once it's downloaded, I open it up and I extract it to a certain place on my hard drive. Now, that is different to how you would usually install a program, and since I download these on a daily basis, they are released daily, it is worthwhile checking back here if you're having issues with your particular version, and obviously don't leave it too long, otherwise you might miss out on some features. So now that that's downloaded, I'm going to open up the zip file itself, and then I'm going to drag the folder across into my documents folder where I have a Blender 2.8 folder already set up. Okay, so that's opened up and I'm literally going to find that Blender 2.8 folder. There it is. I've already added it to my quick access bar. You can do favorites over or onto the sidebar on Mac, and I'm sure you can do a very similar thing over on Windows. Now that that's copying across, what I tend to do is I go to that Blender 2.8 folder, find the download that I've actually got. I'm going to go date modified to get the latest one here. And then I go and find the Blender on, in this case, executable. On a Mac, it would just be the program file. And I drag that to my taskbar. You can drag it to your dock if you wanted to. But just be aware that it probably hasn't finished extracting yet. So you do need to wait for that to finish. Then once the extraction has finished, you can go ahead and launch Blender 2.8. You may get a security warning. I'm going to run the program and off we go. I'm going to maximize Blender and, all being well, you'll be presented with something similar to this. If you do not have this screen present, you may have already tried Blender 2.8 and it already had remembered the options that you'd actually selected. So currently, this quick setup is what you see if it's brand new, and you can even load in your 2.79 settings. Now, as this course goes forward, I am going to be using what the default settings are here, and I will change them later on if I want to. So one of the big changes is if you're experienced with Blender, you will remember that we selected things with the right mouse button, and that was very confusing for a lot of newcomers, and so it's been switched over to left. And then we have what the spacebar does. Now, I'm going to leave it as play at the moment, and later on I might switch it across to search or perhaps something else. And that's the great thing about Blender. You can swap things about as and when you need them, depending on your workflow. So if you're doing a lot of animation, you probably do want the spacebar to be playing. However, when I'm modeling, I tend to prefer it to be searching. So we may switch that quite early on in the course. This next one's interesting, and it depends on how you work. I like Blender Dark, that's the scene you see at the moment. If we switch it to Blender Light, it's a lot lighter. And what I tend to find is I end up using Blender Light more on my laptop when I'm out and about, because the lighter interface is easier to see, especially if I'm in light environments, perhaps the sun's out. At the moment, I'm in my office, so I don't want to blast my eyes with bright interface, so I've selected Blender Dark. And I'm going to save new settings. Now, this is the splash screen you might have experienced if you hadn't gone through what we just done and you'd already installed Blender. So this is your splash screen. We can start a new file here. We can open, we can recover last session. I've got no doubt we'll be using that a couple of times as well. I'm going to click away from the splash screen. We can bring that up again at any point in the top left. We can go ahead and click that little Blender logo there. Not the top one, but the black and white one there, the monochrome icon, and it'll bring up the splash screen. Okay, so before we go any further, I just want to do one final thing whilst we're here and go to Edit and preferences. Now Blender is very customizable, so you can change pretty much everything and anything about it. But the first thing that I want to do in here, and we're going to have another look at the Blender preferences towards the end of the section as well, but the first thing I want to do is go to interface, and under the scale we can change how zoomed in the interface is. Now personally I find it useful to have it about 1.25. Well, when I say personally, I don't mean for me, I mean so you guys can see what I'm doing. So I've blown up the interface ever so slightly, so if yours is more zoomed out, or perhaps you can't see as clearly on the screen, then do remember you can turn up the scale there. I'm going to remember to save my user preferences, so I'm going to click Save Preferences in the lower right, and that will save preferences for all future blend files that you open. I'm going to close down the Preferences window. In front of us we have our interface, our main interface, and this is the 3D editor window that we're presented with our lovely default cube. Unfortunately, we're not very kind to this cube. We're going to end up deleting it several times. However, I do like it being there because sometimes I do use it, sometimes I don't. And towards the end of this section, we'll talk about customizing your interface as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce you to these icons in the top right. So this is to control the 3D view, which you can do a lot of with your keyboard and with the mouse as well. But these here have been paramount in me being able to use Blender on my laptop. Beforehand, without these here, in the older versions of Blender, I just couldn't use my laptop as efficiently as I might have been able to do. I always had to remember 3-buttoned mouse. I fully recommend having a 3-buttoned mouse if you've got one. So using the scroll wheel, we can zoom in and out. Holding down that middle mouse button, we can orbit, and notice at the top here, that little gizmo in the top right was spinning around as well. And we can hold down Shift, and we can do some panning around our scene. Now, it will take you a while if you're new to get the hang of all of these different controls. We can also change our view by using these buttons at the top. So this whole orbiting that we were just doing, we can click in this circle and move around. If you happen to click one of the letters or other dots that are there, you will find that it will whiz around and switch to what's known as an orthographic perspective. And if we have a look in the top left of the 3D editor window, we see it says top orthographic. So we can view our object from multiple angles just by clicking on here. Now you can also use the numpad on your keyboard to do that if you have a numpad. Now the other ones here, the plus, as you probably guess, allows us to zoom in and out. The hand allows us to pan around our scene. And sometimes you may find that when you do that, you lose your model like we've just done here. How do we sort that out? Well, we can go to the View menu and Frame Selected. If we had anything selected, we did. We had the cube. I'm going to use the scroll wheel to just zoom back out again. And the middle mouse button to orbit around. The next two, we're not going to use that much initially. We're going to use the camera view towards the end. This is what you will be rendering. So this is what the camera sees in our scene. And we can click that again to come out of camera view. And this final one is to toggle. And if we hover over there, it's the first time I've hovered long enough, we see that it says numpad 5. This is to switch between orthographic and perspective mode. Now, orthographic is very useful when you're trying to align pieces that are the same size, but where perspective can make it very difficult to do so. It basically removes all perspective from a scene. So if a cube this size is 5 miles away, it looks the same size in the viewport, regardless of how far away it is in reality. I'm going to switch it back to perspective mode, and I think that about covers it. And what I'd like you to do, just to warm up, is make sure you get comfortable with moving around the scene using your mouse or using these controls up at the top right here to move around this cube. This is a fundamental skill that you will have to develop and we'll practice over and over again as we start modeling in Blender. So we've got Blender installed, you're up and running, ready to go. You've been introduced to the preferences panel and we'll take another look at that later on. I think we're ready to go. So that's it for this lecture and I'll see you in the next one.